it's a conversation. Just like you'll have been having with the people next to you before we started talking today. It involves various different parties, it's collaborative, it just so happens to take place online. Like a traditional spoken conversation, social media has two key elements. It's emotive, it includes thoughts, feelings and ideas, but it's also practical, full of questions, information and news. There's an alternative definition to social media by a guy who runs a blog called The Counterintuitive CEO. He's called George Colony. It sits on the website of an organisation called Forrester Research. And he says, social media is a little bit like sex. To understand it, you need to do it. So there's an element of that, the social media element, that we'd like you to take away from today. If you're not already engaged and having a go, then you need to kind of learn by example and try. You can't really know what your audience is thinking, feeling, and how they're responding to your brand without being in that sector and trying it for yourselves. There are some big names involved in social media, most of which you'll have heard of. And though whilst the sector is changing and new ones come all the time, it's the big names that remain important from a communications point of view. They simply have the volume. Facebook, I'm sure most of you are very familiar with that and probably quite active on there. It allows communities to grow, share, stay in touch with friends, grow your circle of friends. Twitter, microblogging, signposts content around the internet. Very, very short messages, just 140 characters, similar to a text message. They're very quick and easy to use. LinkedIn is almost the most professional of all the social networks. It's found its own in the recruitment sectors for consultants, sharing their expertise, asking for opinions and advice. Interestingly, LinkedIn is starting to change some of its content to be similar to how Facebook works. Perhaps that's just indicative of the Facebook generation now in their first professional jobs. MySpace, probably a little bit more well-known a few years ago and one of the first big names in social media. That company has kind of gone back to its roots and acknowledged that it's very much for video content and audio, hugely used in the music and entertainment industry. YouTube, tagline is broadcast yourself, video content. YouTube lends itself fantastically to social media, allows its content to essentially just be stolen and used anywhere on the web, but always linked back to YouTube. And then there's another one that's huge in America and growing and gradually becoming more mainstream here in the UK, a little bit different to some of the traditional social media channels, in that it's a little bit like a game. You're rewarded with badges and statuses for checking into places. It's location-based. That's Foursquare. My colleague James is going to talk you through a couple of examples and how that works later on. So once you know which platforms your audience engages in, and they're all quite different, the rules of engagement in the different channels remain the same. One of the things that's quite hard for marketeers and PR professionals to grasp is that your community that you're talking to, engaging with, is in charge. It's not your messages that lead the conversation. It's a two-way thing. So it's about being prepared to allow your content to evolve, to travel, and to change shape depending on how your audience reacts to it, tells you what they like, they don't like, and what they're most engaged in. Not moving with that evolution can be dangerous. As with anything in social media, the content is king. What you're giving people in exchange for talking to you is important. Is it images? Is it money off deals? Is it extra insights and information behind the scenes, or just sometimes access to a certain person that a normal person, customer, wouldn't be allowed to do? Social media also has a value exchange. People don't take part in a conversation for it to be one way. They want something back. As I said at the beginning, to do with news, information, ideas, it's about sharing. It's also really important to listen, as in any conversation. No one's going to carry on talking to the person who never engages back with them. Social media also has to be incredibly honest. If you're, for example, a large hotel in Madrid and you say on your social media channels, we have the best hotel rooms in this city, if you've got several hundred guests, you can show photos and give real evidence that that's otherwise, and that's going to travel quickly. So manage expectations, be realistic about what you can and can't do. Now, with all of those rules, there are examples of people who have taken those rules and kind of applied them brilliantly, but then not quite followed it through. BT, a while ago, introduced a piece of software called DebateScape, which listened online in different forums and social media channels for people talking about BT. And a little message went back to those people that said, how can I help? Sounds like a great idea, but this message was coming from a robot. So when either people weren't in fact talking about BT, the telephone communications business, they had no idea why they were being contacted. Or if somebody had a genuine problem and responded to the how can I help and said, well, actually, this is my problem, the robot didn't know what to do with that and couldn't actually engage and help. So it kind of blew up in their face a little bit. They had the right idea, but it was delivered by a robot and not a person. Just remember that human beings are the best at conversation. I'm going to give you a couple of examples as to how social media is used as well. One of the things that social media gets a negative view for is being a little bit narcissistic and full of self-promotion. If you want to see an example of this, take a look at Piers Morgan's Twitter feed. I'm not going to put it up on the screen. It might make you feel a little bit sick, but his name dropping is quite incredible. Social media is fantastic for event promotion, good for things that are geographically specific or to a certain niche audience. You'll see huge amounts around that in the social media space. The other thing that's almost changed the way that PR and marketing professionals work is the speed at which news travels in a social media environment. One example, Sky News is breaking news Twitter feed. Interestingly, today they talk about their earnings figures and not their fired sexist presenters. But social news travels very, very quickly in social media. It allows stories to move around the internet and awareness to happen very, very quickly. Social media is also fantastic for knowledge sharing. You can use experts to pass on additional insight and build communities as well. One example of insight and behind-the-scenes access, as a PR person, I love this blog. It's the editor's blog on the BBC website. It gives fascinating background onto certain editorial decisions, why they've handled certain stories the way they have, but it just shows how social media can be used. Some of your mainstream audience, for example, watching the BBC 6 o'clock news, might not be interested in this, but from a specialist point of view, this is fascinating. Social media also comes into its own with just a bit of sense of humour and comedy. This example here, the Compare the Meerkat, most of you probably know the adverts, Alexander Orlov, but there's actually really quite a clever marketing campaign behind all of this and why it was done. The car insurance market is incredibly competitive when it comes to pay-per-click advertising and search engine optimization. Along comes Compare the Market, who financially just cannot afford to bid on those terms. So they invent a campaign, traditional TV advertising, compare the meerkat with your character, but that character comes to life in social media, particularly in Facebook and on Twitter. And so just the sheer physical content on the internet of people talking about Compare the Meerkat is able to bump that search term up the natural Google rankings. And what you find now is that their competitors are bidding over the odds for the term Compare the Meerkat, which has absolutely nothing to do with car insurance, but they've won the race essentially. And if you want a giggle, I do urge you to take a look at it. It's so clever and it's so funny, and the Twitter feed on a Friday afternoon is just brilliant. Social media can also be used for testing products. If you've got something or an idea and you want to know how your audience might react to it, to try that in social media is one way to get really quite instant feedback, and from often the people who might be the most passionate about your brand, your product, your organisation, they'll tell you very quickly what they think and how they think you should work it.